Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. Thanks for being with us here on the program as we set off on an adventure in more ways than one here on the program. Every Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. We're also on Wednesdays for a special edition of Tell Me Your Story, and that's at 9 a.m. on this fine station. Again, streaming live at richarddugan.com. We are also podcasting these programs. They're on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, and other locations that you folks are posting to for us, and I thank you for doing that. We're now on YouTube as well, have been there for several months, starting back in 2020, and we've got over 100 interviews already posted up there from, I think it's going back as far as July. I've even found some old Skype videos that I found I'm putting up there as well, going back maybe a little further. So I hope that you're enjoying these, and I hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as, of course, the SoundCloud channel. Got a lot of people following us there, and I greatly appreciate that. As of this conversation, and again, I always say this, I don't know what these numbers really mean. I've got to get somebody from SoundCloud to explain to me whether or not this is significant or not. But with over 600 interviews up on SoundCloud, we have nearly 34,000 listens since January 1 of 2018. 34,000. Wow. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate that. Also, want to remind you that if you'd like to support this program financially, and we can use all the help we can get, and we greatly appreciate, I really do, any support that you can give us. We have a PayPal account for your security as well as ours. And also participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s. Spend that quiet, peaceful time inside you. Go within, even if it's just to close your eyes for 5 minutes and just listen to that still, small voice. It's there for you, with you, to help you. And we encourage you to do just that. Our program today, I think, I know I'm going to really enjoy it. I think this is going to be a blast. We have a guest on the program who is going to share with us some wonderful insights. His name is Michael Goddard, and he is with us here on the program to talk about, quite honestly, a myriad of different things, and I'm very excited about this. He has several books out, one in particular, A New Now. He also has In Search of Lost Lives. It's his own unique memoir in which he receives over 80 past lives, among others, and then there are even more than that. And then there's also Spiritual Revolution. It's actually a seeker's guide, and I'm going to grab a hold of that one and read it because I'm a seeker, just like you. I hope that's the case. And then, of course, Bliss. These 33 simple yet profound exercises reveal and develop your spiritual core. Try them, and you will experience bliss here and now, which kind of takes us back around the circle to A New Now with Michael Goddard. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael?
Oh, we had to rejoin the meeting. So can you hear me now?
I hear you now, and I will just say thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it.
You have quite a number of books available to our listeners and our viewers on YouTube, and that's really extraordinary, rather prolific in that, from that standpoint. One of the areas, of course, that we want to converse about is this fascinating, I find it fascinating, issue in regards to going through a process that we all are going through. I mean, it's sort of inescapable, if you will, if you know what I mean. And that has to do with, I like to call it the ancient wisdom teachings in particular, but you're talking about mastering wisdom daily and achieving equilibrium. I almost said equanimity. It could be along the same lines, I suppose, and empowering your noble self. One of the things we've talked about on this program with many guests, Michael, is our divinity. Is that a fair word to use in the context of what we're talking about today? Michael? Michael? Hello? Michael? I'll be stepping out for a short time this afternoon at about 1:30, but I'll be back here in the 2 o'clock hour period. What time would you like to meet? Say about 1:30? 2:30? Question mark. 2:30? Question mark. Oh.
You, can I?
I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you've been freezing, and then I've lost the meeting a couple times, which almost never happens.
Huh.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Zoom all the time, but you've been freezing a number of times, and the audio goes, and then the meeting crashes. So hopefully now it'll be more stable.
All right, well, we'll give it a shot here, and I'll just kind of pick it up from where I left off.
Yes.
All right, I'll count it down in 3, 2, 1. Michael, I wanted to ask you about what I call the ancient wisdom teachings. You're talking about mastering wisdom daily and achieving equilibrium and empowerment. Tell us about that.
Well, a lot of people think they are their minds, and they're ruled by their lower minds. So in the book, I really explain kind of the basis of existence, that we're a soul that's associated with a mind that's taken a physical birth. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the quote attributed to Teilhard de Chardin, that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So I really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the nature of the mind. I described what the higher mind is, the lower mind, and the habitual mind. And a lot of people are basically run by their minds, which are a slave to their senses. And so the whole idea of the book is to get you in touch with your nobler self, which is your higher mind, which is more in touch with your soul, so you can go through life easily and successfully. I mean, I had finished the book before COVID, but when COVID hit last year, people got very frantic and worrisome, and it was very intense for a lot of people. I was very grateful that I was able to negotiate all kinds of decisions and learning how to be. And we were constantly being bombarded with all kinds of conflicting ideas and information. It was actually a very confusing time. I had quite a few friends, almost every local friend fall away. They were too overwhelmed, I guess, by their own lives. So I was, unlike some people, I was in quite a state of isolation, but I was able to rise to the occasion. And actually, 2020 turned out to be a very rich year for me. I actually enjoyed myself, although my heart was breaking for what people were going through. So one thing I want to stress about the book, Richard, Anew Now, is that it's a little challenging to convey verbally because it's a self-participatory experiential book. So you are actually engaging with your consciousness as you're reading through the book. So you really, to get a real experience of the book, you have to read it and experience it.
Well, now you talk about how we have an untapped reservoir of awareness, and you also make reference to our opportunity and our chance to step into, and this is a rather big word here when you contemplate it, an omnipresent reality, which reminds me of the story in Autobiography of a Yogi where his guru slaps him on the chest, and all of a sudden he just is aware of everything.
Well, yes, I mean, with the right guru and the right slap, that can happen. So, I mean, I've heard many stories like that, real stories that have come through. But most of us have to put in the work. And everybody, no matter where you are in your path, I think it's important to honor where you are. But the thing is, we are here with a spiritual purpose. I write about in my spiritual memoir, In Search of Lost Lives, I identify many of the different spiritual purposes I had in each life. Now, you may be aware of it or you may be not, but this is a precious opportunity being alive, and it's crucial that we don't waste it. I think of Earth as one of the toughest schools imaginable. It's really a challenge. Even if you're materially well provided for, you're going through all kinds of stuff. Everybody is suffering. The reason we're all suffering, even if we're not aware of it, is that we're separated from our source, the source of supreme being, which is, you can't really even describe by words. If you try to, you could call it absolute bliss and love. So each of us has that soul spark within us, which is pretty much dominated by the mind all the time. So in the book, I differentiate between the lower and the higher mind. And many people their lower minds are predominant most of the time. You know, if they're doing service, if they're being kind, it's sort of like their higher mind steps in and takes over. In my memoir, In Search of Lost Lives, I actually identify the life in which my higher mind became predominant. That was 12 lives ago when I was in Tibet. I was a very high up government official, but I also came in touch with two evolved monks. And that was really the first time in my many, many lives when I saw and recognized the fact that we can achieve spiritual evolution. And from that 12th life back, my spiritual evolution really accelerated.
How did this, in this lifetime, we'll try to keep it simple for everybody.
Sure.
In this lifetime, when did you become aware of this vast, we'll call it omnipresent reality of who you are, who you really are? And again, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, which is absolutely true, because you and I, the real us, is immortal.
Right, right. Well, just to back up a bit, right after we moved to California from Illinois, right after I turned 11, I started to confront death. I mean, physically, I would stare at myself in the mirror and tell myself, you're going to die. And I tried to imagine experiencing that. And it was such an overwhelming experience. Literally, at that point, I decided to devote my life to achieving immortality. And that began my search, which I won't detail. I do describe it in the memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And I started meditating daily at age 19. And I think at that point, I started to experience an omnipresence. I had those experiences and I continued to search. And then I began my current practice when I was 21 of Bhakti and Shabbat yoga. That's what it's called. Bhakti is basically a Sanskrit word for devotion. And Shabbat is the name of, another name for the Holy Spirit, the Logos, the creative power of the Supreme Being. So, but also just meeting what I consider fully realized souls. Souls, if you have to put them on the scale, they have returned their consciousness to the eternal sea of being, having their presence in my life, my teacher, my guru in my life. That was an experience of omnipresence. Having the sight and the company of those saints, those masters, I would literally lose myself, my sense of self, my individual being, and just be, floating in this very blissful omnipresence. So that's what we're aiming for and we're working toward. But everybody, I encourage people, no judgments about yourself or other people. The thing I want to do is empower people to take responsibility for being a spiritual being and figure out how you want to make best use of your life. And that can be any way.
Well, I've often thought about the various parts that make us up. There's the physical, there's the mental, the emotional, and then, of course, the spiritual. Some people might even subdivide some of those as well. But to keep it simple, those four, the specific categories. Is bliss considered an emotion or a state of being? That's one of the things that's kind of perplexed me a little bit.
Yeah, well, depending on the nature of the bliss you can experience, it can be both. I mean, you may feel you experience bliss on an emotional level, but true bliss is on a spiritual level. I mean, there are levels of bliss, and everything's relative. Pure, unalloyed bliss is really the experience of your soul being liberated. But we have snatches of bliss. You can be meditating and have the hardest meditation you can imagine, fighting with your mind, and then an hour later, something may catch your attention, and then you're immersed in bliss. So make happen. It's sort of like, you can make it analogous to inspiration. You can't make yourself inspired. You can do things, and I do write a lot about inspiration and intuition in the book. You can do things to hopefully induce inspiration, whereas for intuition, you can actually work on it. And that's something I've been attending to and working on actually since my 20s, in addition to meditating. And go ahead, Richard.
Well, I'm going to share something with our listeners that it's sort of behind the scenes here a little bit. And because I think it's important for us to talk about this, considering the fact that it's happening. And also, just as a reminder, folks, as you've heard me say many times, and this is the first time you've probably heard it, Michael, the universe asks the questions. I'm just along for the ride. And that when things happen, they're happening for a reason. Whenever I've had any challenges facing getting a guest on this program or other things going on in my life, for example, what that is telling me is that when I do eventually reach that place where I bring the event, whatever it is, an interview or what have you, to its conclusion, it is better than it would have been if I'd had no challenges, if it had just been a nice, easy, smooth ride to that place. I say that to say this. We have been having some internet issues where I have lost Michael twice in just the first 20 minutes of this program. I just had you fade out and come back again in about 3-4 seconds. And I want to ask you, see, because I have a hard time believing, because I never really read this in the context of my metaphysical primer, Autobiography of a Yogi. I have a hard time believing that there's quote unquote evil or evil spirits. That I have heard it said that spirits, that we are spiritual beings, become very mischievous for whatever reason. And that what we have to share on this program, you and I, especially specifically you, of course, with all of the work that you have done, is so important that for some reason they feel as though they need to interfere. And you've told me, you've done numerous Zoom interviews, never had any problem until now. So I want to ask you about that in your search, as you talk about, especially in your memoir. What's your awareness, your understanding, your perspective on the difference between entities being mischievous, just as you and I, we can be mischievous in this world, in our physical bodies, as opposed to something evil that is out there trying to stop this information from being disseminated?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think everything and anything exists in creation. I am not recalling at this time anything evil or mischievous interfering with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I do think people, basically, I think people are puppets. They really have, they're working through their destiny. And basically they're reading, no matter how awful it sounds, they're reading a script, even though they don't know it. They're really not free and liberated yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and when people are in relationships, all of a sudden the dark side of your partner or the dark side of a friend may pop up, and they may do something for no reason. And it could be mischievous, even evil. I mean, my dearest, closest friend for decades, something triggered her. I think I know what it was. It was right around the time my mother was ill and dying. And a really evil dark side came out, which shocked me and my friends. And that was the end of that connection. So this is why it's so important to work on your spiritual evolution and liberation, because the mind is, basically the mind runs, the super mind, the universal mind runs 3 realms of existence: the causal realm, the astral realm, and our physical realm. Mm-hmm. So the mind is super, super powerful. Even people, mind and souls who traverse the inner regions and reach very high levels, their minds can still drag them down, even after they experience themselves truly soul. So basically, often we don't know why things happen, why stupid decisions are made. This is basically, I look at it as a play, and the script has been written by our actions in the past and our desires. I think very much who we are is defined by our desires. I write about that in the book, in the section, The 5 Aspects of Who You Are. And something may be interfering with you. I mean, some of the evolutionary spiritual experiences I describe in Search of Lost Lives are when a teacher I was working with between lives comes in and interferes with me in a good way, mm-hmm. to basically precipitate an evolutionary spiritual experience. So a lot of stuff happens between lives. I write a little bit about that. I write about my cohort of 7, which is what I always referred to, the 7 beings I was mainly with between lives, when we were reviewing lives and working on getting better and learning what we had to do before this life. So I hope that answers your question in some way, but I don't think we can really know what's interfering. You know, maybe there is some glitch in one of our internet services, some interference.
Could be just a material, more of a material, technical glitch, as you use the term in that regard. Yes. However, even though we may not know why it's happening in terms of who's doing it and so on and so forth, whether it be in this world or other, or dimensional or life between lives, that kind of thing. There's something that tells me that for me to take the perspective that I have, you know, not trying to find out who's doing this and why, but mm-hmm. to interpret it as I've described already. Okay, this just means that whatever comes out of this is going to be awesome. And I have to tell you that 99.9% of the time, it's better than it could have been if nothing else, if there had been no challenges or
okay.
resistance.
Yeah, and now that you're describing it that way,
Mm-hmm.
I've had this experience over and over again. And when somebody falls out or falls down, they don't deliver, and they make a mistake, it does end up being much, much better. And the main thing in terms of your own personal responsibility is not to get judgmental, to be accepting, to be positive, to be calm, to be in equilibrium, because these kind of things, these failures, which happen all the time, can really set some people off. They can let loose with a lot of anger. So I just say, thank you, this is what happened. So particularly during this media tour, this has happened a lot, where something has not worked out, and then it's been turned around and become way better. We've had a much longer interview. We've established a greater connection and commitment to come back. So I identify with the way you described it just now.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I have to tell you that it's been extraordinary. And I sometimes my guests, they will feel very frustrated, and I say, hey, no, it's okay. I want you just to relax. We will get this interview in. But what this means is when we do, we're going to really hit some really good stuff. And I really feel strongly about that. We're talking with Michael Goddart. He has a number of books available for you at his website. He has authored a number of books, acclaimed books about spirituality, reincarnation, mind and soul, spiritual teaching, love and truth. One of the books is Bliss. Another one, of course, is Spiritual Revolution. His memoir, In Search of Lost Lives. We're going to jump into that in just a moment. And then, of course, the latest work, A New Now. And we hope that you will pick up a copy of his work, because it just, the information that you can garner from our guests is, whether you agree or disagree, is irrelevant. What we ask you to do is consider the possibility. And we're talking, of course, about mastering wisdom daily through this work, achieving equilibrium, and empowering your noble self. Before we jump into past lives and so forth, because I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about, as I sort of alluded to at the front end of the program, our noble self. What does that mean to you?
What that means, it's our self, which is really more in touch with the soul, with your higher mind being predominant. It's the part of you that wants to be of service, that wants to find a higher love and evolve spiritually. And being your nobler self, you're in equilibrium. Things can happen and you're detached. You don't fall apart. You don't lose it. Mm-hmm. It's all the wisdoms come naturally. In the book, there are 33 wisdoms, which I identify. 33 is basically the master of master numbers. And those are the 11 loving wisdoms, the 11 guiding wisdoms, and the 11 evolutionary wisdoms. Mm-hmm. So when you're your nobler self, you have a certain command of these 33 wisdoms, and you're advancing through them. And also you can gain in the book the 10 keys to achieving equilibrium. And in each of these chapters, I describe multiple ways to teach yourself, to train yourself interactively. I really put the onus of responsibility on the reader, Richard, because we're not cars in which we can drop ourselves off for a 30K service at our dealer. I mean, it's just not going to happen that way. Yeah. You've got to take responsibility for your journey. And I know a lot of your listeners are seekers. They're seekers after truth. Until we become the truth, we're seekers. And they've read a lot. They've gone to seminars. They've listened to podcasts. And the thing is, you can read the most beautiful, inspiring, and practical book and maybe take away one or two or three things. And then the next week, you have no recall, at least I don't, of what I've read. And because of that, what I've done is incorporate a section on the journey journal. And this is the means for getting the most value of the book out of the book and for empowering you on your spiritual journey. And you can actually download a Word file of the journey journal on my website, which is goddard.com, spelled God, G-O-D, and Dart, another D, A-R-T for Tom. And it's just a Word file you can download. And it's something for you to keep track of what you're doing, what you're feeling, what your hopes and inspirations are. And you can date your entries. So you can go back and see what you wanted to achieve, what your state of mind is. And you can organize it any way you want. But what I do have is a template of the very complete table of contents of the book with all the many sections, you know, all the different wisdoms, the equilibriums, the sources of wisdom. That is an important chapter when I go through the 5 sources of wisdom. So I encourage people, if you're just at all curious, to go and download the Journey Journal. And that may get you started on the most wonderful journey you can imagine.
You know, it's fascinating the way you described this, your process. I just wonder sometimes if even if, as you say, you read the book and then, you know, a few days later, what did I read that? I can't remember now. Not so much to that degree, but I like to coin the word from a book I read. It took me a long time to read this book because when I first bought it, I mean, it was paperback, but it was like, I don't know, an inch and a half, it seemed like, thick. It's a thick book. It was called Stranger in a Strange Land. And finally, I got it on Audible, and I listened to it over and over again. Now, I'll be quite honest with you, and I'm not going to spoil it. All I'm going to tell you is I loved the story. I thought it was great. I hated the ending. I'm saying, you can't do this, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it yet. But there was one word that I took away from that book that I really try to use and to use as a verb in my life, and that is to grok. And I interpret that or define that as to assimilate into every subatomic particle of my being. I have to wonder if, as you are reading, there isn't some level of assimilation in you where, okay, your mind, your ego-centered personality mind, the monkey mind, I guess we can say too, may not remember, but it's in there because you've read it. Because as the old saying goes, you can't unread what you've read. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unhear what you've heard, kind of thing.
Well, when you were talking about that, Richard, I got really good goosebumps because that's one of my most favorite novels of all time.
Oh, wow.
I read the novel Stranger in a Strange Land when I was 16, and we drove down from Marin County to, guess where? Santa Barbara, where you are. And I just, I had a very, very challenging family, to put it mildly, but I just escaped in the book. And grok was really a familiar word in my vocabulary for years. And I always feel so good when I hear people use the word grok, which, you know, you can't really define. It's like to get it, to assimilate it, to absorb everything, to know. I think grok might be another synonym for to know, which is a very important part of my discussion in the new now. So I do agree that there is some part of you that is assimilating. I mean, it's always a challenge for me to do interviews because I'm a writer and I work word by word. And it's like, when I picked up my book again, to start to look at it before the interviews, it was like, did I write this? I don't have any idea, any recall. How on earth did I do it? I'm always a little anxious before interviews. It's like, I don't know what I wrote in the book. I'm not sure I can answer any of these questions. My higher spirit will just have to come through. but there is some part of us that assimilates when we read and we listen, and there's some higher recall. Some people have, we're all advanced in different ways. I mean, some people come in with photographic memories. I mean, I think Mozart is always such a great example. I mean, he didn't come in with a tabula rasa, blank slate, and just because he was living in Austria at that time, he was a genius composer and musician. No, I'm sure he was, first of all, he probably formed the desires in prior lives, and he probably did a lot of preparation between lives, and he was given just the right circumstances, and even having a difficult father or difficult circumstances, that was all part of his play at that time when he was Mozart. Who knows who he is now or where he is now? So we only kind of know what's going on at the moment. It's really kind of, it seems unfair that we're in such darkness, but we're here to gain light and to gain knowledge and to begin to grok existence. And that's my whole goal, is to help people grok who they are and where they're going.
I love it when we incorporate these wonderful words. And of course, I also loved the Audible. That was the one thing that helped me get through the book. I had the print version that was very difficult for me to read because I have to hold the book with one hand and use my magnifying glass with the other. Although now I have visors with magnifiers on them. But when I got the Audible, the reader, the narrator they selected just did the greatest voices throughout the whole program. And of course, by the same token, I've always loved Audibles before they were called Audibles, because as a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, I was listening to talking books and recordings for the blind, because I was legally blind and I was a client thereof. So, this was, Audibles, that's, oh, come on. This goes way back, when we first started recording stuff. And I've even recorded a few books, not that I've written, but for my first wife, who was totally blind. And there's just something about that. You just have a lot of fun with it. The process, I'm curious, matter of fact, before I dive off of that board yet, are any of your books yet in Audible format?
No, not yet. That's a project I hope to get to soon. Okay. Because I've had a number of requests.
Yeah. Well, you and I may need to talk, because I also produce audibles, audiobooks. Yes. Yeah. So that would be a lot of fun to play around with, and maybe we can make something happen there. We're talking with Michael Goddart and Goddart.com, GODDART.com is the website where you can find out more about Michael and the number of books that he's written, articles, and you can also get to that Journey Journal. I just downloaded it, as a matter of fact. I haven't had a chance to open it yet, but I just downloaded it along with 2 other PDFs of a couple of articles that you've written. And I just find all of this fascinating. Is there a particular, how do I put this? Philosophy that appeals to your soul, say, more than any other, especially having discovered what did you say it was? How many different lives, human lives, that you've already discovered, not to mention the lives that you came into this world as an animal?
Well, I recovered 71 human lives, which were necessary, I feel, for the book, and along with that, 17 animal lives. But I did recover the total number of human lives. I came through with absolute definiteness, and that was 4,137. And wow. And I actually, this may be very far out for some listeners, but I do include lives on other planets. This is my 3rd planet. The first 2 planets were more evolved spiritually, not technologically. So Earth is like, for me, it's like the hardest playground in school yet. So
that's what I've heard. I've heard that this is a tough place.
Yeah, very, very tough. And I may have forgotten your question. You're asking me about how many lives I read.
Well, not so much how many lives per se, but the particular
Oh,
philosophy.
philosophy, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends how you define philosophy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a philosopher is a lover of wisdom. And that's really what my book tries to do, is to help people, support them in becoming their own philosopher, a lover of wisdom who lives through wisdom, because that way they can find the pathway to becoming their authentic self. But if you're talking about a particular philosophy, like a philosopher who's written about different things, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like Kant or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, one of my key past lives, which resonates very much with my life today, I was a Greek philosopher, actually. And I wrote 4 scrolls and had them reproduced. So that's a life that resonates with me very much today. But if you ask me what my philosophy is, I would say it's mysticism, which is not a philosophy. Mysticism is purely experiential. You don't come to truth by thinking, by reasoning. You come to it through direct perception, through experience, through automatic knowing. I mean, I'm sure most listeners can identify time. This is what you can do. This is what's right. So uh, empowering your nobler self is really a bit of a course in mysticism. It's raising your consciousness so you can act automatically, sleekly, smoothly, to know how to be and what to do moment to moment without cogitating over it, without pulling out a book on philosophy and consulting it.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to have a spiritual foundation, my book, Spiritual Revolution, is a great place to turn to. Actually, a leading Australian bookshop, soon after it was published, named as one of the 10 greatest metaphysical books ever written. So for just having, and that was just a beautiful honor, but for really establishing a spiritual foundation, I would recommend Spiritual Revolution. It has all the principles of spirituality. So it's not so much a philosophy, although you can become wiser and better serve yourself by reading it and acting on it.
I don't know about you, but I, of course, was born and raised into Roman Catholicism.
Mhm.
I was curious, even at a young age, about other philosophies or religions, if you will. We grew up next door to a family of Mormons, which was a rather interesting scenario, but I didn't realize that it was interesting until after I started working for the Christian radio station in Phoenix, Arizona, when I found out that there was this tension between Catholicism and Mormonism, and that apparently the Mormons taught back then, at least, that Catholicism, the Catholic Church, was the whore of Babylon. I thought, when I heard that, I'm going, really? Because our families got along really well. We all played together and had a good time. I don't know what the problem is. Maybe that's what they need to do, is go back to childhood. But I've been studying so many different ones. I'm still curious about so many others, but I've never found one individual personality to follow. When I was at the Christian station, I was chatting with someone about finding Jesus, and I made the comment that I found Jesus. I'm on my search. And they said, well, once you find Jesus, your search is over. And I don't know, it must have come from my higher self or something, because I said, no, once I find Jesus, my search has just begun. And I firmly believe that. And the Baha'is, of which I was a member of for about a year and a half back in the early 90s, I love the phrase, if you accept one of the messengers of God, you accept them all. If you reject one of the messengers of God, you reject them all. And I have to tell you, I thought that was really profound. I just thought it was great to hear. Your thoughts?
Well, I love the quote from the Baha'is. One of our closest families were Baha'is. We were surrounded by Catholics. We were not Christian. My parents were, I would say, kind of lapsed Jews, and I let go of that religion when I started my search at age 11. So, I mean, if you want to talk about Jesus, it depends what finding Jesus, how that's defined.
Right.
If it's the Christ consciousness, it's one thing. If it's the actual person, that's another thing. If you think you're following the person who lived over 2,000 years ago, how do you know? I mean, you would actually have to meet Jesus if you could. You know, I can't say exactly where he is. I have heard stories which are really, really quite fascinating. I don't know if we want to get into it on the program today.
Oh, we certainly could, but go ahead, continue.
But a lot of these exalted beings have not merged back yet into the supreme ocean of bliss. And if you can ascend to the higher regions, which we're pretty unaware of unless we're meditating and you go with them, you can actually meet them. And I've heard many true stories of people who've met exalted beings within. So let me just explain for a moment what within means, because that may be confusing to people.
Yes.
We have, well, first of all, we're a collection of energetic bodies. I'm sure most of the listeners have heard about chakras. But in my book, I go through the different energetic bodies and identify several that I don't think have been written about. But we have an energetic aperture at our eye center. And it's basically, it's where you're pulled through when you die, when you go. You're pulled up through the eye center. And if the thing is, you can experience death while living by collecting your consciousness, concentrating at your eye center to pierce that energetically and go up to your third eye. And from there, you can begin to explore the inner realms, which are of a much higher frequency and subtle energy than the physical realm. There is a degree of matter, like in the astral plane. I mean, for ease of discussion, we have the physical world, we have the astral realm, which consists of vast, vast, vast universes, and above that is the causal realm. And as you go up in these grand divisions of existence, you have less and less matter and more mind and more spirit. And ultimately, you can go beyond mind, where it's just spirit. So that, in a very short capsule, is kind of a rundown on going within and the inner realms. So I've heard stories of those who've gone within and seen higher beings who were on Earth, who are historical figures.
Yeah. I actually did a search, just to touch on this for the moment anyway, about Jesus. I did a search. And now I remember, of course, according to the Bible and the New Testament, that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph are going to Bethlehem exclusively for the purpose of being counted, to be a part of the census. But they were never counted because Herod, of course, passed the edict, kill all of the children under 2 years of age. They hightailed it out of there. So they were never counted. So there is no record of them in the census. And so I thought, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's absolutely no physical record beyond the Bible? And of course, I did some searching and I found out, well, there's reference, but it's about 100 years later by I think it was Josephus, who makes reference to the personage of. But he wasn't alive when Jesus was walking the earth, if that's the case. And there are people who there's the old saying, I'm not going to believe it unless I see it. And of course, it's in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, where that kind of statement is made. Okay, I get you. But blessed are those who believe and don't see. And so, I will temper my curiosity about his actual physical existence that I can't seem to verify by some kind of primary source record going back 2,000 years, by saying that obviously he had to have had some influence. And then, do you remember? And again, I don't want to get bogged down in historical facts and things of this nature, because you don't really have that when you're talking about the spirit, when you're talking metaphysics. It is what it is. It's not based in flesh and blood or physical material anything. But I'm just curious, are you familiar with, I'd read also an article just recently about how there was a propaganda war in the 2nd and 3rd centuries between the church and, I guess to put it in the best ways, the anti-church of so to speak, or those people who they did not agree with the church, as it were, and they fought against it, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I've heard of that, and I know that some of the Gospels were suppressed and then later discovered. But the fact is, he's not our contemporary, and the Bible is an absolutely rich source of spirituality. But the fact is, Jesus himself did not write it. I think you need a realized soul person alive now to really explain the Bible, all its true mysticism. So the thing is, great souls come and they give their teachings to their disciples, which Jesus had, and then they leave, and then religions form in their wake. And because people who are not fully realized start to run the religions, you can have disagreements and splinter groups. I mean, there's all kinds of religions have competing factions.
Yeah.
So religion actually the word comes from the Latin religare, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which means to bind back to God, to return. So that's why, rather than religion, I was just so lucky in grace to let go of mine, and to search for a path of mysticism.
I always found it a bit, I want to say, contradictory that, and this is just kind of my view of it all. Contradictory that there are a myriad of different foods that we can eat, books we can read, educational endeavors that we can take on, careers that we can take on, things that we can drink, people that we can meet and associate with, and of course the list goes on. And yet there's only one path to God. And from my standpoint, that just didn't make any logical sense.
Well, there are two things that come to mind. Well, I think there are many paths to God, and you really, the thing is to find what calls to you now, what path calls to you, because we're all on our own distinctive individual journey. And that's why, I mean, you never want to judge yourself or other people. I think a lot of people have inverted egos, or they have a certain kind of, well, not humility so much as they don't trust themselves. So they take on what other people tell them to take on. They'll take on different religions or beliefs, which is making it easy. I just want to empower people to take responsibility for their own search. I mean, you have not found that exalted physical being yet, and that may be true for the rest of your life. Now, decades after I was initiated onto my current path, a great friend of mine became interested and came on the same meditation path. But she kind of resented me because I came on the path so early, and she was just doing it in her like mid to late 40s. And I don't know if she's read In Search of Lost Lives, but now if I were to see her, I would say, hold on a minute. I was searching for several lives devotedly before this life. I came into this life all set up to go at an early age. That's when I was meant to be. I mean, there are people who may come on a spiritual path when they're 92 and have enormous spiritual progress.
Yeah.
That is just waiting to happen. We shouldn't even second guess, where we are at, where other people are at.
Right.
The whole idea of a new now is to create an omnipresent present where you are making the right thoughts, decisions, actions, moment to moment that advance you on your distinctive particular path, ideally toward God or whatever you want to call. I actually give alternative names for God in the book. And the one that resonates with me is love source, joined as one word with the S capitalized. So the whole book is very equal opportunity as to choose what you want to call your higher consciousness or a higher power.
Yeah. And of course, if people choose to follow a particular individual, that's their choice. I just never found one. And I never felt necessarily badly about not having done that. It just never appealed to me because it was, from my perspective, maybe it was one of those things where, well, but if I choose one, then I end up having to not deal with any of the others. And I'm interested. We talk quite often on this program about how we put out this smorgasbord of ideas and concepts and theories and philosophies, if you will. And I don't want to miss out. You know what I'm saying? That's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I can identify with that.
Yeah.
My last life, I was English, and I called that my English seeker life. And I tried on and sampled all kinds of things, like theosophy was very big, and spiritualism. And that was a life for really seeking, and I would get very frustrated at times.
Yeah.
But then 3 lives ago, when I was a commercial architect in Baltimore, just after the revolution, I came across the Comte de Saint Germain. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes.
He was this master who was reputed, some people believe he lived for centuries. I was his contemporary when I lived in Denmark 4 lives ago, when I didn't have any idea who he was, but my search was accelerating. So 3 lives back, I came across him, and I went to Philadelphia on a stagecoach 3 times just to find more reading materials about him. So it's really about knowing what resonates with you now. I mean, now you have this fabulous show and you're coming across all kinds of people. I mean, this is your path right now.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily, in a way you are seeking because you're being exposed to so many things and you're able to sample them. I mean, the whole idea of a smorgasbord, and there are plenty where I live in Palm Springs and the casinos, is that you get to sample all kinds of dishes and you can go back for seconds if you want with a clean plate. So this may be your smorgasbord life.
Yeah, that may very well be.
That.
No,
and that's great.
Yeah. And I even encourage people to come to the table, take what resonates with you. Don't just dive in and what have you. I mean, that's certainly one way of doing it, but take what resonates with you. I don't want you to get a metaphysical upset stomach, okay? Or digestive problems. I want you to assimilate it and see if it works for you. It would be the same as if you were out in the forest foraging for food. Let's say you were out there, you were on a survival hunt, and they teach you how to forage. And you don't just reach out and eat a red berry because, oh, it's a red berry, it must be delicious, and it could be poisonous. You just don't do that. It could be poisonous to you now. But as you partake of different things each time you come to the table, you build up, let's just say, your spiritual immune system so that you can take on more and take on more and take on more. And hopefully we collectively, we raise our consciousness. That's really, from my perspective, one of the things that I am really kind of strongly pulled towards is raising my own, but helping others to do the same, because that's the only way we are going to make change in this physical world. Was it not Einstein who says you cannot, and I'm going to put it in my vernacular, you cannot face the challenges with the same consciousness that created them? So it just seems to me logical that we need to raise up our awareness, our understanding, and through the work that you're doing, Michael, I think that we're able to do that, and I'm glad that you are amongst us in this regard. And I thank you so much for sharing these works with us. This is wonderful stuff that we can put to I want to say put to practical use, but I'm not even sure if that's an appropriate term to use, because none of it's really practical, you know?
No, actually, the book Anew Now is loaded with example after example of practical situations and how to deal with them. It's really designed to help you navigate through your day in all kinds of situations. So it's eminently practical.
Okay, well then I stand corrected, and I love that. I was talking with one of my guests not long ago, and I was sharing my perspective on something, and he said, well, you know, that's interesting, but let me just put this to you. And he did. And I listened very intently to what he had to say, and I thought about it for a moment, and I said, well, there goes another one of my grass huts up in flame, and I'm more than willing to set them all ablaze, because there's a phrase that I learned many years ago in my early 20s, when I thought I was pretty darn smart, because somebody told me that I was wise beyond my years. I'm not sure that was necessarily a good thing, but it's helped me. And they said to me, it is better to begin in doubt and end in certainty than begin in certainty and end in doubt. And that has stayed with me ever since. So all of my beliefs are nothing but grass huts, ready to be set aflame by the fires of truth and wisdom and understanding. And I'm hoping that others will do the same. You know, I mean, I have my ways of doing things, and I'll teach you how I do it. But then when I'm done, here's the result that we're looking for. You figure out the way you want to do it. And that's really, really what it takes. And I really appreciate the time that you've given us here on the program. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really loved engaging with you very much. I love the conversation.
Well, I'm not done engaging with you yet. I want to talk about past lives, but I also want to talk about something that you did make reference to, and I refer to this more now than ever before, the whole concept of life between lives. I went through the program. It's a conscious hypnosis therapy session where I am totally aware of everything that's going on, and that the therapist is guiding me at one level, but asking me non-specific questions along the lines of this. So, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? What are you tasting, smelling, etc., etc.? Not putting any words in my mind or my mouth. And it was extraordinary to go back to my last life before this one. Talk to me a little bit about your understanding, not only about the life between lives, but about the many lives that you have lived, and how you have, I want to say, made peace with it, because you've come in touch with so many of them. That must have been at one level a little overwhelming and maybe even a bit confusing.
Well, it was everything. I mean, one thing that coming across so many lives, I mean, the first lives I recovered really explained who I am today. They revealed what my sanskaras were. And a sanskara is an impression from a past life. I came in, and everybody does, with all kinds of idiosyncrasies, particular talents, affinities, likes, and just unusual things. Like I mentioned that Baltimore life a while back. When I was 7, I started drawing floor plans and elevations. And I developed a portfolio. I worked on it for 4 years. When we moved to California in Marin County. Somehow I heard that Frank Lloyd Wright, who was I was a big fan of, had an office in San Francisco. So I asked my mother, can we send my portfolio just in to just see what happens? And sure enough, I was called in for an interview by the head architect. And he said, when you graduate from high school, you have a job here. I want you to come back.
Wow.
Well, I came in with that talent, but that was actually an unfulfilled desire, Richard, for my life as an architect, because I did only commercial buildings, and I developed a strong desire to do residential, which basically I would say congealed or hardened into a destiny karma. So I came in with that in my destiny and that desire. And then after he offered me the job, I lost interest in doing architecture because I was more, what was of prime importance was finding my spiritual path. But I do write a little bit about preparation for lives, between lives, work I did with my group of mind spirit entities, my cohort of 7. But I found some really shocking things. The first life I discovered on another planet, I had quite a few triggers initially that would literally automatically open up lives. And then I became quite, I was able to really access any life I wanted and get really nitty gritty details. But the first life I came across reading poetry from a saint. And this life opened up when I was a ruler of a country. And I started an unnecessary war, which caused the deaths of over 260,000 men, women, and children. And that life just hit me full force in my consciousness with the memories. And I just sort of fell to the floor and crawled into a ball because I felt so bad. Well, because of what I did with that war, and there was a reason for starting it, which I go into in the book, I had to spend a period which seemed like an eternity in a state of reformation, which the common parlance would be hell. It would be what I would call a bespoke hell to kind of grind out of that awful karma I had created. So there are, the words are just loaded with emotional baggage, but there are heavens and there are hells, and I write a little bit about them. I think a very important section of the book, Anew Now, is the wisdom of grooming. And people may stop and say, why does he have that as a section? Well, I go into the different types of grooming, which are physical, mental, emotional, but also spiritual. And that's a very key section in that chapter of wisdoms, because I kind of give people 4 options of how they can groom their life, their destiny. And it's a very key thing, because it's basically, here it is, here are 4 choices, which one do you want? Take responsibility for your life. I mean, if it's just going from one desire to another, let's say you just want to spend your life drinking cocktails and bowling and smoking, that's fine, but be aware of that. And I even talk about how you could possibly end up in a heaven for a seeming eternity. A lot of the higher souls who do good works are going to be rewarded with a heaven, which they won't want to leave. So I don't know, I just feel very lucky to have learned all this while I was still alive, because when I die, I don't want to really be concerned with my past lives.
Exactly. And yet at the same time, how would you address the Shakespeare phrase that all the world is the stage and we're merely players, but merely players, in that the 200,000 people, or whatever that number was that you threw out when you were that ruler that started that war, they were all there playing their part just like you. Now, granted, you took some actions that do generate karma. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But each one of those individuals also came to the earth at that time to be part of that scenario that they had signed on for. What's your awareness or understanding of that in that context?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, that's a brilliant line, and I have like a familiar line in the book, Spiritual Revolution. really telling people to act, as if they're playing their best part. But see, the rub of living here is we don't know if we're creating karma or paying off karma.
Ah.
There are three types of debts. Karma is just basically a debt. It's the result of an action. It's the reaction which you accumulate. So there's your destiny karma, and there's your reserve karma. Like if you kill over 260,000 people, you're going to have, you can't pay that off in one lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to go through the equivalent of that suffering. So I paid off a big chunk of that when I was in that reformative state.
Mm-hmm.
But the same thing is if you kill, 5,000 cows in your life, you don't necessarily have to come back 5,000 times as a cow, but you've taken on that suffering. That action you've created is going to create a reaction. Mm-hmm. So the really tough part, and people could really say it's unfair, is we don't know if we're creating new karma or just paying off what we came into. Mm-hmm. And you hear stories of people in the Holocaust. Someone may have been tortured by a particular officer. Well, they may have tortured that person in the Spanish Inquisition, for all they know. I mean, I've heard stories like this where this was revealed to the person by a saint, by a master. So you don't really know, and that's the tough part. And that's why it's so good to try to rise to a level where you can know, but really, I consider this really as not only a school, but a prison house, to be honest. And it's a tough place to be.
Yeah, I can see both sides of it. I as you describe it. One of the things that I found so fascinating was the conversation that I had, and I also read several of Dr. Newton's works on the subject with his studies that he did, and how there was the description of the cluster, the plethora, if you will, of, I'm going to refer to them as souls or entities, souls, we'll use the word souls here, that you interact with from one lifetime to the next. Now, you are always in the same cluster, but there may be millions in your cluster, but
there may be what?
There may be millions of souls in your cluster. I have no idea what the actual, what the numbers are. It's kind of like in the military, you have your platoon, you have your brigade, you have your troop, and I don't know how the numbers break down and all of that. But these are the souls that you interact with from one lifetime to the next. And as they say, the person that you're dealing with today could have been your father, mother, sister, brother, friend, coworker, boss, slave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It could have taken on any number of different roles from one lifetime to the next. So all of the people that you connect with throughout your day, week, month, year. All of them, but you don't know them consciously in this life unless, either A, you accept that concept of connectedness within that cluster.
Yeah. Well, in terms of clusters, I didn't really, I just something very similar, which is my cohort of 7. There were 8 of us, and I consciously know who they are or were. Mm-hmm. So these are the mind and soul entities I've had the most incarnations with on Earth, and which far exceeds the number of other people. Now, in this lifetime and 2 lives ago, when I was an English banker, everybody was together at the same time. Those were really the only 2 times. Other lives I may have known 2 or 3. We had all these different relationships. As to whether we existed in like what you might call a grand cluster, I don't know. I didn't really go into that with my recovery, but I definitely came through and I identified who all these people were, because I found out that they were all, I've known all of them. And I was I wasn't the most charismatic person, but I was a central person who knew all of these. But we would come together and review our lives and prepare for the next ones. And you'd be preparing often with different spiritual teachers or guides.
Well, I again, this whole subject is just, it's so fascinating to me. My and I share this with our listeners quite often, that this subject is near and dear to my heart, not because of anything other than I'm just curious as all get out, because I'm wondering what an individual is at that time experiencing, okay, at that moment that they're transitioning. And of course, with the books by Newton about life between lives, that has helped to answer some of those questions. And to me, it's just fascinating what somebody experiences. And before we wrap up, let me just grab one more question in here in this regard. Have you had either a near-death experience or experiences, or out-of-body experience or experiences?
As far as I know, I haven't had a near-death, and I believe I've had some out-of-body experiences, which I hardly remembered, but I can kind of remember myself traveling.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I would like to emphasize, there are many accounts of out-of-body experiences where you're still attached by the silken cord and you travel around and see the earth. What I want people to become aware of and become interested in is an interbody experience. When you go within with your consciousness, fully aware, and you explore the inner realms as far as you're able to go with a guide, because otherwise you'll be completely lost. And then you return consciously into your body and remember it. So it's really, rather than kind of being in a quasi dream state and traveling around the earth, it's more of a super consciousness. And we all have that capacity within us. We have that potential to go for it. So rather than look for phenomena, I want to encourage people to become the phenomena, rather than kind of get interested in all kinds of crazy, weird, paranormal things that are out there, like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Why not become paranormal yourself?
Yeah.
Have a consciousness that exceeds anything you've ever dreamt of.
Yeah.
Because it's all possible. Everything can exist and is possible in our existence.
My guest is Michael Goddart, and we have been conversing about a whole lot of stuff, especially in relationship to the work that he is doing, the books that he has written, and just among them, a new now, In Search of Lost Lives, which is his memoir, Revolution, Spiritual Revolution, and Bliss, along with a bunch of other articles. I encourage you to go to his website, Goddart, GODDART.com. Get a copy of the Journey Journal for a New Now. I'm going to take a look at that myself and follow through on that as well. I think it'll be real interesting. There are a couple of other articles and a bunch of other stuff on his website that you can look into and continue, as I like to say, your evolutionary and transformational process. And of course, the Journey Journal, which is your guide to mastering wisdom daily and achieving equilibrium and empowering your noble self. And so get a copy of that. That is free from his website, and you'll be glad. I think you'll be glad you did. I was glad to have had you on the program today, and I thank you so much for giving us so much time here so that we are able to really dive into some of these subjects. And I look forward to having you back again, because I know we have quite literally just scratched the surface.
Yeah, thank you so much. I found it wonderfully engaging, and I look forward to discovering all kinds of topics with you. And I just want to mention the Journey Journal you can download as a template, and sort of the directions for how to use it are in the beginning of the book.
Wonderful. And it's always good to have those instructions. And guys, read the instructions, okay? Don't mean to be sexist in the male context, but hey, we all, I can put it together. I can do this. read the instructions. It'll just go so much easier for you. And that's what they're there for. They're there to help you out. I have three final questions that I would like to ask you, that I've asked all of my guests, and you may have answered them to some degree during the program, but I like to ask them pointedly. But before I do, I want to thank you for listening and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we give you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m. with a special edition of Tell Me Your Story on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. on this fine station. And again, we are streaming at those times at richarddugan.com. The podcasts for all of these programs are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, and other locations you folks are reposting our interviews to. Thanks for doing that. I appreciate that. And we're on YouTube, the YouTube channel, Richard Dugan, Tell Me Your Story. Just look for the guy with the hat. And we hope that you enjoy them. We'll be linked to Michael Goddard's website, goddard.com, where you can, again, as I said, continue your evolutionary process and continue to raise your awareness and your consciousness and just be be a better person tomorrow than you are today. Then that does not mean that you're not a good person now. You're great right now, but as they say, there's always room for improvement, especially if we're trying to make this world a better place, but also make ourselves better in the process and learn the things that we need and want to learn as we move forward. Also, a reminder that if you'd like to be a part of what we're doing here, if what we're bringing you resonates with you and you'd like to support us financially, we do have a PayPal account for your security as well as ours. And please take that time to go spend that time in the inner world of you. Listen to that still small voice in the quiet and peace of that place. Find some time, even if it's just 5 minutes, just close your eyes, not while you're driving, and just contemplate yourself and get to know who you are. I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. It's not, I guarantee you, not wasted time. Might be a little scary sometimes, might be a little hard to do, but it's worth it. It really is. Well, let's see. Now with that out of the way, my final three questions for you are, number one, who is Michael Goddard?
Oh, well, I'm a soul and mind entity that is going to liberate my mind so I can exist as pure soul in a state of love and bliss.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you're doing now?
Well, I want to me, this is a service that I'm able to do. I want to empower people to pursue their spiritual paths and gain insight into their journey through life. That's what I'm doing now, in addition to attending to my meditation with all the devotion I can muster.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
Oh, well, my life's purpose in terms of my worldly purpose is to be a writer and to write about spirituality, to articulate spiritual truths. And my sole purpose is to gain liberation from my mind.
Well, Michael, I thank you so much. There is actually a final question I do want to ask you in light of our topics today. When you use the word liberation, some people might interpret that as leaving the body. What is your definition in this context of our conversation today that you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it does depend on context and it can be used in many relative situations. When I talk about liberation of the soul from the mind, it's not really an airy-fairy experience. It's really a state of being when you have really paid off all of your karmic debts and are released from the mind. And you can ascend in higher and higher states of bliss and love and consciousness beyond the mind. I mean, who we are, the observer, the consciousness, is our soul. The soul is what animates us. When we die, the soul is taken out of our body. Mm-hmm. If you've ever seen a dead person, whoever that person was, they're no longer there. Right. So liberation is true. Final liberation is what I was talking about. But there's also liberation from your lower mind and having
Yeah.
your higher, nobler self predominant. So it really depends on the context and how you want to use it.
I have to say, my wife and I had the great pleasure when she came to town of meeting Temple Grandin. But one of my favorite lines from the movie, when she was in the slaughterhouse and they popped this cattle to death, her question was, "Where did he go?" And the rancher that couldn't answer. He didn't know. I thought that was so interesting. Where did he go? Because she knew that he had left.
Yes.
And I find that I love that. Every time I think about that, I'm going, where did he go? Well, where we have to go is to the end of the program. And again, I thank you so much for joining us on the program. This has been a great pleasure.
Oh, you're most welcome. I enjoyed every moment. Thank you so much.
And I thank you for listening and watching. Tell me your story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we give you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to love.